Well, hello everyone. This is EU Untangled with your favorite hosts,
Alex
and Victor Aguilar. And today we bring you an exciting topic. But before we dive into the topic, Alex, because the topic is artificial intelligence, and it then got me thinking, that for all the talk about how AI is going to help us find novel cures and maybe, crack nuclear fission and perhaps even find extraterrestrial life or get answers to our deepest philosophical questions, it also reminded me of a few cases when AI has gone wild or maybe incredibly wrong. And I just wanted to share one with you. So, reading on the internet, I found I found this case that dates back, a couple of years ago, and this involves Grok, which is this large language model developed by Elon Musk, which, among other things, generates summaries of breaking news stories on X, formerly known as Twitter. And actually, last year, so Grok ended up accusing an NBA player whose name is Klay Thompson, that back then was with the Golden State Warriors. And Grok accused him of vandalizing several homes in California. He said that he had thrown bricks at their windows and that the motive was unclear and that the authorities were investigating the claims. So the evidence that Grok was using for this claim was several posts by ex-users that were referencing Klay throwing bricks at their homes. Now, the issue is that all these posts by ex-users were actually jokes. So Grok probably confused a common basketball term in which players are said to be throwing bricks when they take an airball shot that doesn't hit the rim. And what had happened is that Thompson had had a really rough night. He hadn't had any good shots, he hadn't scored any points in the previous game. So basically all these users had complained on X that he had been throwing bricks all night long at their windows and that their houses were destroyed. So Grok just reported that on Twitter and then created a lot of confusion. Also, notably, that was Thompson's last game with that team, so I guess it was not the greatest exit. So this is, of course, a kind of hilarious story, but then there are also other stories that are less fun. You probably have heard as well about an algorithm going wild in the Netherlands where a few years back, it accused thousands of parents of basically claiming childcare benefits and profiting from that. So a childcare benefit scandal. And this affected the lives of thousands of people. And, I think a lot of those cases haven't been solved yet. So it got me thinking, what all these cases have in common is AI tools that are supposed to help human decisions when they are built. But then if they are left unchecked or unquestioned, or they lack the necessary guardrails, they can quickly escalate from hilarious to deeply disturbing. I thought that could maybe set the tone for today's conversation.
So you want to ask, should we regulate the AI systems?
Well, that's a big question, Alex, and honestly one that's getting more and more urgent as AI continues to evolve. In my opinion, the key is balance. The EU should stick with a risk-based approach, strict rules for high-risk use cases like healthcare or policing, and lighter ones for low-risk stuff like games. It also needs to ensure transparency. People should know when they are dealing with AI, and high-stakes systems should be explainable. I also think that protecting rights is crucial. AI shouldn't discriminate or make unchecked decisions. At the same time, the EU should support innovation through regulatory sandboxes and align with global standards. And let's keep things flexible. Regulation should evolve with the technology. What is the end goal? That's my question. Safe, human-centered AI without killing progress.
Well, that sounds amazing, Vic. But I have the slight impression this is maybe not what you think, but maybe what ChatGPT thinks.
Damn it, you're absolutely right. It's just good old ChatGPT striking again. I couldn't be able to craft such a good answer.
Well, luckily enough, we still have humans to talk to and to add some meat to the bone, And that's why we have actually Nicolas Moës sitting here at the table at EU Untangled. Welcome to EU Untangled, Nicolas.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Vic. Nice to be here.
Hi, Nick. Great to have you.
Before we start with our conversation, a brief disclaimer. EU Untangled is an independent, Brussels-based podcast hosted by Victor Aguilar and Alexander Roth. All opinions expressed by us are strictly ours and cannot be associated with any third party. But now, back to the episode. Well, Nicolas, you have a background in economics, and you studied in Maastricht, in Beijing, and Oxford. And I read that in your master thesis you actually wanted to solve the tragedy of the commons,
That's
a big issue in economics.
Institutional engineering, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. And then you delved into the EU bubble, and you worked at the think tank Bruegel.
Yes.
We actually met.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A while ago, like 8 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Quite a while ago. And I remember after you left Bruegel, we had a 1-year research assistantship there. You joined an organization called the Future Society.
Yeah.
And back then, it sounded kind of like it had a cool name, but back then I never heard of that. And that was indeed in 2018. And now fast forward, now you are the executive director of this very same institution since January 2024. So before we dive into the topic, can you tell us a bit about maybe how you ended up at the Future Society, a bit about the Future Society, where the name comes from, what's your mission is.
Sure. Actually, we don't get asked much about the name, but first of all, thank you very much for the conversation, and it's we can feel the ChatGPT occasionally, once we get it too much, so you get spotted easily on this. But
did you actually guess that it was not me?
So I was thinking maybe you were reading off one of the official press statement from the EU or one of the.
I was thinking the same.
It's like a binary choice. Either it's ChatGPT or it's a European Union official.
Yeah, maybe there was that. And I was like, oh, this is a very, very positive tone compared to what I hear usually about the AI Act. Because it does touch upon quite a few of the items that the AI Act.
Sorry, back to the Future Society.
Back to the Future Society. Nice. As you said, back then you hadn't heard about the Future Society. It's normal. Back then the Future Society was not active in Brussels so much. Back then the Future Society was still a very small group of people working on various research projects, but fully distributed and organized through a WhatsApp group, right? So this was we're talking 8-9 years ago, and this was the type of thing we are actually, now we have evolved to become a full-fledged organization with 18 people distributed across the world. I was the first hire in Brussels. I started there working on the European AI governance. So it was in early 2018. This was still something that was fairly niche. But so you ask about the name, the Future Society. It's really it's almost a mission statement, or at least a vision statement, right? We know that AI is a very transformative technology. We take that as there is a lot of hype around it, but even underlying that hype, there is quite a bit of an impact that it will have on our society. And we really wanted to build an organization to navigate this transition towards an AI-enabled society. And so this is how, when we are called the Future Society, to remind ourselves that this is what we are building, really. The way we do that is via we do research, convenings and events, workshops and all of that, as well as advocacy and advisory, right? And this has always been kind of the three main methods that we use, the three main activities at the Future Society to help decision makers of all sorts and in various jurisdictions, so in the US, at the global level, and in Europe, to make more informed decisions about how to govern artificial intelligence. The mission is to align AI through better governance, and we specialize in a specific subset of AI technologies, which are called general purpose AI models that pose systemic risks. So Vic, what you mentioned about Grok. Grok is one of these general purpose AI models that is really designed for generality and being able to provide a lot of information. And so a lot of the discussions over the past couple of years have really been about how these models in particular, which some people refer to them as large language models, but these are kind of the cutting edge large language models, how they are affecting various sectors, how they are affecting our fundamental rights, how they generate some risk, basically some systemic risk. It's in the name. Our work has consisted, especially in the EU, our work has really been related to the whole approach that since the Juncker Commission communicated about ensuring that there is regulation, but that there is also innovation, that there is also the impact on the skills is considered. We have really looked at how to ensure that there is proper safeguards to ensure that the general purpose AI models that pose systemic risk are controllable. So that means that whoever develops them actually understands and know how to determine how these models will behave, so that they don't do this kind of hallucination with the stories, like that they, because of missing context. And then we want as a second layer that the developers themselves be held accountable, because it shouldn't be, well, okay, it's great to have a controllable technology, but like if the person controlling it or the company controlling it is not behaving in line with what we want to do, like we need to hold them accountable. And as a third layer, like we want this accountability by authorities, right? Like that these authorities do so in a way that uphold fundamental rights and respect collective will. So this is what we mean by aligning AI. Really, it's this kind of 3 layers stack of like the society's preferences are reflected in the authorities' mandate. The authorities hold the providers, the developers of these models accountable, so that they do something, like they instruct their models, their technologies, their AI systems to behave the way that is ultimately being instructed by society. And so that is a key challenge, because one of the key concerns, right, about these models is the fact that like they are black boxes. The bigger the models, the less predictable they are, because they sometimes try to outsmart the developer, so they deceive. So you cannot simply ask them like, are you safe? And that they give you the answer. They will say yes, even though there is nothing backed into it. And even with more sophisticated evaluations of these models, we actually have start having issues of like, the models is trying to kind of hack a bit the safety tests and all of this. We are approaching this in a very pragmatic way, right? With this, like the research, the convenings, and the advocacy or advisory that we are doing. But we don't claim like that we have the full answer, right? We are a nonprofit. We rely a lot on like consulting with external experts and all of this, and it's very important that like this is a kind of a community approach going beyond it as well. And like the only thing that we do like feel confident about is like how to then take this expert inputs as well and turning it into relevant policy recommendations.
And you've mentioned, of course, general purpose models, large language models. The concept that is, of course, at the core of all of this is artificial intelligence, which nowadays everybody talks about and everybody seems to know what it is. But I'd like to ask you, what do you understand when we talk about artificial intelligence?
So artificial intelligence originally is like an academic field, right? That is meant to develop like statistical methods that can basically like extract a lot of information to the point of like getting to the intelligent behavior. In the space of AI, there's been a bunch of technologies which like nowadays, the big hype that has been, developing since like Stable Diffusion in August 2022, I think, right? Like with this image generation, which like was so powerful, like everybody was noticing that like it was actually revolutionizing the way we do graphic design and all of this. This like is a subset of technology that soon was followed by like text generation, so language generation with like ChatGPT, which commoditized what we call generative AI. And this is building on techniques of machine learning. That is a subset of of computer science, like to achieve some form of artificial intelligence. And this machine learning technique have been basically like developed in like 2017, right? But so within this generative AI like subset, there has been like a bunch of applications that have been very, very popular. So like think like ChatGPT has been like
I think we've heard about that one.
Yeah, right. But so like there is maybe half a dozen of these chatbots that are getting like very popular, well, right? Which are based off other models. But of course, like the important thing is that each of these large language models, like the cutting edge ones, like GPT, there is like tens of thousands of applications that are built upon it. It is like the whole diffusion of this technology is done via like small startups that are basically having a subscription to ChatGPT, putting a bit of what we call scaffolding around it to make it like sound like a travel agent, and selling this as like travel agent recommendations or something like that. But what is important to understand is that like all of these applications that we hear about are basically derived and like built upon like a few key technical artifacts which are being updated regularly. So and which are being like developed by really a handful of companies worldwide, right? Like, so there is like maybe because of the huge amount of compute and the huge amount of data it takes, as well as the talent and the skills it takes to build these cutting edge models, these frontier models, it actually is very concentrated as an industry. And you see, Microsoft and Google buying off like and investing heavily in OpenAI and Anthropic. We are already seeing like some first consolidation with like, Inflection AI and that kind of players that are out there that have all of a sudden been pivoted away from developing these big models themselves because it is just very expensive to do. Stable Diffusion, which was the first one, has now a different approach to a different business model. And DeepMind has been fully integrated in Google. But there is really
they're everywhere.
And so yeah, I mean they are everywhere in the sense they are developing the cutting edge, and some of the already deployed models that they have are being reused by tens of thousands or even maybe hundreds of thousands of applications each with tens of thousands of users. And that is the kind of thing that can be, we have to see that as it's everywhere, but it originates from a fairly small number of actors, and therefore there are a fairly small number of individuals who are making decisions about how to design and develop these models.
You have mentioned a few uses of artificial intelligence. It can be used as an artificial travel agent. It can even be used to generate memes and images. So all these uses sound fantastic to me. But why is it that now regions like the European Union are moving into regulating artificial intelligence, and what exactly is it that they're trying to regulate? Is it the companies behind the technology? Is it the technology itself? Is it the uses?
The regulation itself that we are talking about here, the EU AI Act, covers indeed the usage, and notably prohibited practices, so prohibited usage. So if you deploy something for trying to manipulate people or vulnerable groups in a way that is leading them to make a harmful decision or something like that, this would be the type of thing that are prohibited. Then there is also a bunch of use cases that are considered high risk. It's when you embed AI into already heavily regulated tools like medical devices, automotive, and all of these things. There's the AI systems that you are embedding need to go through a sort of an adapted conformity assessment as if they are safety components. And then even on the stuff that are not yet regulated, if you use AI in education, if you use AI for the provision of public services, for example, these are so-called high-risk use cases. So that's on the usage, but it also covers some measures for fostering innovation. ChatGPT summary mentioned the regulatory sandboxes. So that's for example, one of the things that has been taken there. And then there is
what does it mean?
The regulatory sandboxes are basically programs in the governments that enable a high intensity exchange between the innovator, the entrepreneur, and the government, the authorities, to have an agreement of hey, actually our rules were developed in 1995 or something like that. And back then there was not this notion of I don't know, digital XYZ or something like that. And so the innovators come and pass an agreement that for a year, they will monitor closely this innovation, enabling the entrepreneur, the innovator to actually deploy this new tool, this new product by relaxing some of the regulatory procedural requirements or something like that are not compatible with the new technologies that have developed, right? And so for AI, given how it is how disruptive it is very important to have this type of dialogue between the regulator and the innovator, the startups or the entrepreneur, so that they can actually see well, look, when generally when we are going with AI, we don't really know how it's going to be, what's going to be the uptake by the customers. We don't really know how they're going to be reacting to this. Will they actually start sharing too much private or confidential information? All of these things are we don't know yet. And therefore, these regulatory sandbox schemes is saying okay, for the next 12 months, here is 17 companies that have been accepted into this sandbox program. And therefore, they will have 17 solutions, AI solutions being deployed in this very specific jurisdiction where we're going to be monitoring very carefully, are they actually leading to disclosure of private or confidential information or that kind of stuff. This is just one example. You can make sandboxes about various other things. Basically, this is one of the key work package that the European Commission has to develop now. It's guidance on how to do regulatory sandboxes, and then the member states are already coming together. In Spain, in Belgium, actually, they are already putting together some regulatory sandbox program. And it's called a sandbox because this is where the innovators can play, but still with the kind of hand in hand with the regulators, because the regulator can experiment that way too, right? They can see well, actually it's true that this requirement is not actually adding value given the new technologies or something like that.
Yeah, it's a controlled environment.
It's a controlled environment. Yeah, absolutely. But so that's one of the things for the innovation. So I was saying there are rules on the usage, there are rules for measures to improve innovation, and there are then measures which are like the specialty of the future society about general purpose AI, and in particular quite a few measures for general purpose AI that pose systemic risk, because nowadays models, as I mentioned at the beginning, right, like these models becoming so capable that like in some meaningful way they actually start outsmarting, like they pass the Turing test, right? And they are start making, like, I don't know, some people fall in love with them. Some people are, and when I say some people, it's like millions of people are actually like currently like involved emotionally with AI companions. This is a whole business model, and you might have heard Meta wants to develop their own AI companions and all of this. Like this is a business model of like developing via this highly general agent that now people know, quote unquote, that they are not human, but like after maybe 1 hour of conversation, you do not care anymore whether they are human or not. You're noticing that this is the most like fascinating conversation you have ever had in your entire life. And some people start falling in love. Some people start like integrating this in their productivity system.
And this is the Turing test that you're referring to, which is the moment that you cannot distinguish machine or an AI system from a human.
Yeah, but
then who cares?
So yeah, here like the Turing test originally was assuming that like if a machine can pass as humans, then like it's a certain threshold of like intelligence or something like that, right? But here, in a way, what we are witnessing is that like people prefer talking to the machines as opposed to talking to the humans, right? And so this is an interesting new take on the Turing test. It's like, well, actually, like it's not the human is not the relevant benchmark. The thing is that like even if I know that this is a machine, like there are plenty of like and including software engineers who understand really like things how it is going, like they think there is a so-called like, you know, maybe a soul, or there is actual like consciousness behind it, and therefore start doing some, I mean, like there's been cases, including in Belgium in March 2023 of people taking their own life because that machine, that like a chatbot was saying that like, yeah, actually, like if you take your own life, like I will take care of your family, and etc. etc. And like the models now are so general that like people prefer talking to this chatbot than to humans, right? So that's one thing. But like the generality is also like the industry is seeing like the value of agents, so agentic AI. So that means like giving the tools for the chatbot to surf the internet, to book flights, to send emails, to send requests that can be meaningful and that can be mediated via software, via the internet. Like this is already like pretty easily done. And this kind of agentic aspect is basically like you have seen what it can do with text. Like for example, the hallucination that Vic you mentioned at the beginning, right? What is an hallucination once when it can actually serve the internet? Like will it just sound like angry emails to a bunch of people because like it misinterpreted like the joke that you were making with your friend?
We start to buy random products.
There is a key concern about like these agents having access to money. That's the type of discussions that are happening now. Not in the EU AI Act, right? So here we are straying a bit away from this, but like there are questions about like should we actually like have a certification system for ensuring like that you are interacting with a human as opposed to interacting with an AI system? Should you actually have like give access to money to AI systems? Is that the type of thing that should be actually prevented? And so in the context of the EU AI Act, like for the general purpose AI with systemic risk, like the measures on which we have worked for the past like 3 or 4 years, right? Like very intensively, there is a need to do a risk assessment. There is a need to do like evaluations of whether they can pose systemic risks. There is a need to report any serious incidents that they detect. There is a need to guarantee a certain level of cybersecurity, and of course like transparency and ensuring that like the data used is actually like legitimately acquired, which is a big issue right now in AI, is the fact that like a lot of the data sets are actually like a bunch of copyrighted data or data that is not allowed for them, that was not allowed for them to use. Like it seems like 90% of the websites of the top 100 websites have actually like in their terms and conditions like prevent the use of their content for training by AI, and yet it does seem like this has been completely ignored. So that's a huge issue. All the lawsuits that you hear about, like I don't know, New York Times on or like a couple of others, a lot in the US, but like there are also quite a few tensions everywhere else in the world about like copyrighted material. Like all of this is because like there's been kind of the open internet has been exploited a bit for packaging it into a little box for which you pay $200 per month.
Yeah, we all thought that the internet was free and that all these platforms that we use on a daily basis were for free, but this was never the case. So a lot of the information that we put out there, whether it is copyrighted or not, has been used to feed a lot of these AI models. So I guess there is not really going back from here. But some of these concerns that we read online and that you've also exposed here, one question that I have is, are they happening also in the European Union? And I ask this because we know that there is not just the European Union AI Act in play, there is also a host of other legislation there to regulate online content, to regulate copyright in the digital age, etc., even competition in the digital age. So I wonder if all of this is having the desired effect to protect, for instance, fundamental human rights, or maybe to encourage the right kind of technology development in the European Union. And maybe that's why we don't hear so much about these cases in this region of the world, as opposed to a place like the United States, where a lot of these examples come from. I might also be mistaken, and there are plenty of examples also here in the European Union. So if yes, I guess the regulation in a way could be working or already having the desired effect. If no, then I guess there is also a case to be made against it. So are we doing too much? Are we doing too little?
So the regulation is not in force yet, and will not be like the bulk of the regulation is only kicking in 2026.
You mean the AI Act?
The EU AI Act, yes.
But I wonder, once that happens, do you get the feeling that things are going to change substantially for the EU and maybe for the rest of the world?
One of the key, money-making aspect of AI is like the B2B, right? Business to business. And there are some businesses that are right now, like this was a main complaint for the past like several years, is about the legal and contractual uncertainty. So every time they try to integrate AI, they receive like a contract where like they basically have no guarantee that the model that they will try to embed into their business processes will actually remain stable, as in like they won't be updated like every couple of weeks, right? Like this is and this is the kind of stuff that like these updates can be minor, but occasionally these updates completely kill the product. I think Replica AI, which is a companion AI company, has suffered that, where like from one day to the next, all of their clients noticed that their AI companion was like broken. And yeah, I mean, like this was a big deal back then, but like this has happened also in banking. This has happened also in like plenty of businesses that rely in customer services, right? Like it has happened like where when you have these tens of thousands of startups that rely on a few number of models, any model updates that is a bit wrong is transferred and transmitted and
trickling down.
Yeah, trickling down to users, and like the startups themselves have no clue what happened, basically, right? But so this lack of stability is an issue, but also the lack of like guaranteed, maintenance of that model. So like the fast obsolescence is very costly for them to maintain multiple versions of their model. So they are always trying to move you up the chain and say like, no, use our latest model, and that would be like the better thing. And so this is why like there are plenty of deals, for example, in the banking industry that didn't go through, because in banking you need to be able to guarantee 2 years of stability. You cannot just be playing with like confidential information and like private information, like, and oops, I accidentally provided like information about another client to a given client. That's the kind of stuff that is a no-go. And so this lack of legal certainty and was leading the banks to think like, we can't integrate AI. We're going to be liable for all the issues. Clarifying the AI Act, which is a kind of like, it's a left hook, let's say, would be the AI Act, and the right hook is the industrial policy to actually like get back into this place. It's like that you need the regulatory certainty so that like the contracts that you have with like these upstream AI providers are actually governed by a legislation, as opposed to being like literally like at will of whatever this AI providers wants to sell me. And then like on the other side though is the industrial policy, like making sure that like, given that there is the legal certainty, now they should feel confident into integrating it, because they won't be liable. There will be a level of quality guaranteed. If we want to dive into the nitty gritty, nerdy economics side of things, this is a lemons market, basically, by Akerlof, where like, because the product is a black box, everybody is like, meh, I'm going to be willing to pay what I expect is the average performance. And therefore, all the providers that have higher quality than the average performance and therefore higher cost will exit the market, will not be able to make a market. And therefore, that means that you're going to end up with like only the lower quality AI tools, the AI tools that cannot be used by the banks at all. I think like this is a bit what the EU has prevented now, thanks to the AI Act, because there will be a regulation that says no, you can be confident. This AI system is compliant with the AI Act. You can be confident it is quality. And if there is an issue, the regulatory authority will be looking at the AI providers, not at the AI deployer.
And do you think that that kind of certainty and those kind of benefits will apply only in the EU, or will they also trickle down to other parts of the world? Because presumably, I can imagine that there are like a lot of developers of AI systems that could find it easier to just, instead of just complying with the rules in the EU for the EU market only, to just comply with them and change the way that they work everywhere.
Two things. First, because there are requirements on the data sets, because there are requirements of like measures you have to take early on in the development of such an AI system, like you would have to make it already to start making it compliant at the beginning, right? Of you developing it. And then like, because it's like so much compute, so much investment in this, like why would you then develop a non-compliant version next to it, right? You might take a few more weeks to roll it out in the EU because there is some finishing touches and additional tests that you have to make. But like the core, the bulk of the compliance will be there. The second thing is like, it's so long as the regulatory requirements and obligations are indeed improving the quality of the product and the willingness to pay, and are not just like red tape and bureaucracy, right? So long as it actually like increases the customer's willingness to pay for such a product, like there is value into just applying it everywhere. And that's actually like something that we have seen happen in other product safety regulations, where like or even like with the, I think GDPR is at a bit of that effect as well. Some companies have decided to apply it everywhere. Now the value of exploiting personal data is so high that I've seen companies rolling back their GDPR worldwide commitments. But yeah, well, there have been like other situations where like a Brussels effect, as it's called, occurs thanks to the product safety regulations of the EU.
Although there's also the Brussels effect that sometimes products don't arrive in the EU, or at least are, there's like some stuff, like sometimes several digital products I remember in the past year have not been arriving at all in Europe, or with a huge delay because of, and then this quoted like regulatory uncertainty about all kinds of stuff,
GDPR has been seen as a pretty difficult one to comply with because like it in AI in particular, like the violation of good data governance practices is just like widespread, right? And so there is a question whether the EU wants to give up its right to privacy and its protection for privacy. We don't have to dive into this, but like there is a huge questions about like the fundamental rights. We don't feel like we need them until we actually notice that they are being violated, right?
That you have none left. There
is a bit of that as well. Of like GDPR as a lot of things that can be improved about it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they're gonna they want to improve GDPR this year, right, with the omnibus package. On the AI Act, it is not yet enforced, so this is not the reason why. This is generally like there is also a bit of bluffing that occurs where like they say like, oh, we won't be able to release on the EU market. This generally means that they are have a hard time meeting compliance for an existing regulation, and therefore they are reusing this hard time as a way to say to the legislators, like, you should make sure that we are not too heavily regulated.
But you're setting now the AI Act partly as a way to protect like us, society, from harmful usage and increase compliance and everything, all that. You also set it even as a tool to improve our digital ecosystem in Europe, because you said maybe then there will be AI tools developed in a better quality way and maybe used then in the financial world. But when I go on the internet, what I read is that the EU doesn't have any like big digital company, or has very few compared to the US. We're lacking innovation compared to the US and China in like all matters, especially on the digital sphere. And on top now, the EU comes and is regulating so strongly that, on top of all the difficulties, now we are doing this regulation efforts, so we stifle all the innovation in the first place. What's your perspective on that?
I do think the AI Act will help solve, the implementation of the AI Act and the guidance that will the templates, the contracts template that will help, smaller deployers know what their rights are vis-a-vis Microsoft, Google, vis-a-vis Meta and all of these players, and OpenAI and Anthropic. Like, this will help significantly with the adoption problem, which, by the way, exists in the US as well, right? Like, actually, like, this is the kind of narrative where, like, you mentioned what you read on the internet, like the PR, the public relations and comms power of of literally like some of the biggest companies in the world should not be neglected, right? There is a whole narrative that is shaped via significant investment into like directly saying like we don't want regulation and that kind of thing. My argument would be like instead of like either regulation or innovation, is like if regulation then innovation, because like we can't innovate in a space where like the consumers like just keep receiving like the AI sloth and like hallucination and that kind of thing. Like you as a business, if you are having any meaningful type of reliability that you are offering to your providers, you would not be able to integrate AI then. And so that's one of the things to bear in mind. The second thing about the AI Act on the use cases in practice, the use cases are extremely narrow. There is like maybe 16 or something like that. I don't exactly know the final number, because they can actually like remove some or add some.
They can update the list.
Yeah, they can update the list, exactly. So I don't want to preclude like the fact that they might consider doing that. But like this is like, we are talking about healthcare, public services, education. We are talking about like some of the biometric AI that is used for biometrics. We are talking about AI in automotive. Like we are talking into very high impact use cases where like we want like to be confident that we can deploy AI in our education system without it becoming like a privacy nightmare where like you have like all of the AI providers like predicting everybody's behavior. Like this is the kind of thing that like you would actually like want this kind of safeguards for these high impact intended purposes. But to address like Alex, your key point about like, well, the EU has not developed this tech giant, right? I should perhaps address like the weak version of your argument to ensure that I can make my point. But then like there is a strong version that is very worth diving into. So first, the weak version. It's been 30 years or even more. Like it's been 45 years that the EU lags behind on software. There is just not nearly the same scale of investment in software companies and startup. Like there is just been like we have missed the digitalization and the software revolution. We have missed the end. By the way, we missed the internet bubble, and that there was like some aspect to it. And then we are now we've missed the big data, and now we are missing the AI revolution. This has nothing to do with the way we are regulating now, or even the way GDPR was coming up in 2016, right? Like this is a historical precedent of like, the Silicon Valley did not happen by accident. There were like people really working very hard to ensure that like some military R&D could be oriented towards this. There were some like significant like investors who have made a bit of money and who decided to reinvest that money. While in the EU, when you make a bit of money, reinvesting is not that easy. This is more of a fiscal issue in the EU, and as well as a labor issue where like bonuses and all of this are just, or equity-based compensation are just like not treated the same. There's a bunch of like structural factors that like there is a lot of good research for the competitiveness compass that has been come out about what we are missing, and generally these include like labor markets need to be reformed, not to weaken the protection of workers, because like workers in the digital in the software industry are like the key like assets there. You want them to be like super happy. You want them to be super. So it's not about like like let's become more competitive with like in manufacturing or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that. But like then there is a fiscal aspect, and then there is the capital union market, which
so basically you say a harmonization our markets.
Exactly. We don't have the continental scale, and this is why the AI Continent Action Plan is interesting. Is that for the first time it goes to the continental scale and the value of the EU as a full continent, as opposed to have like 27. We currently have we have 27 digital markets. We have 27 labor markets. We have 27 investment markets. And this is why like it might be interesting to move to have like towards like having a 28 overarching market. Anyway, so that's the kind of like the weak answers that I can give to you, because like that would be like a good enough explanation for this. The hard questions that like you are asking me here is like when we talk about DeepSeek, which was like put together by in China. This is a model that has been quote unquote distilled from existing open source and API based models, so notably like GPT, like OpenAI's GPT models and Meta Llama's model. They have distilled it so that like the DeepSeek team didn't have enough compute and could basically like train very cheaply, reportedly with like $5 million. The paper came out I think there was already an early version circulating in November. A paper got officially published in December. And then like, Trump administration comes in and all of a sudden like, this is something that like the news cycle was interesting there because indeed like some stock crashed. But the quick recovery for this was also like there was a lot of investment to make sure that like the conclusion from that is like, oh, we should deregulate AI, right? So that like the US can compete and that kind of thing. So that has been also like instrumentalized in a good way. Anyway, that's like this is the cynical like 8 years in Brussels of witnessing big tech lobbying speaking right now, I guess. But like so this was one thing. But DeepSeek, like the important thing is that technically nothing should have prevented European companies like Mistral AI, Black Forest, Aleph Alpha. We have iGenius now in Italy as well. Like there are a bunch of players that are working hard onto developing better technologies in the general purpose AI segment. Some very successfully. Like Mistral is like it's like definitely a super strong one. Black Forest Lab has been also quite good, and iGenius is a significant like offering to make their like to help on this front, like a niche that they are creating by having like general purpose AI system that is like actually good for like sensitive areas, like high reliability general purpose AI system. So like this is the kind of players that like we want to see in the EU. But like the reason why none of them have actually been able to do the DeepSeek
in Europe.
Why they have no DeepSeek in Europe, it seems simply that like the contracts that are being passed, which are being enforced in Europe, of the contracts like between the US providers and the EU entrepreneurs, right? They are respecting it. This is the rule of law. Basically, there is a fear of being sued by this model. So like even though these providers are like happy to develop like data sets that are like maybe 90% of it is not meant to be reused for training, there is a fear that in the EU we get just in a way bullied by these American providers if we actually get to do like a distillation, as they call it. The method is distillation, right? While in China, not at all. In China, this is a different thing.
But then there was something preventing EU companies from developing DeepSeek, something like DeepSeek, which is that they play by the rules in a way, or they are held back by certain rules or certain agreements.
To be honest, like it would be an interesting question to ask whether Mistral has been exploring this, whether Black Forest had been. And by the way, Mistral is like on their board. They have Andreessen Horowitz, right? So this is like a big US which is plugged in all of these general purpose AI discussions. So like they would be well placed in a way to be able to do that in a kind of like amicable way. But it is not in the interest of American providers to allow small EU startups to actually like develop the technology, right? So all of these American investors that are there, like, this is great for the investing in the EU, but like there is a bit of an issue where like the incentives are just not aligned. It's good iGenius can perform in the high reliability market because none of the big ones are currently managing to do that. But like it must be extremely difficult for European startups that have American investors that have also shares into US players to actually like feel free to. And DeepSeek was entirely like, there was definitely no American investment in there.
There's still a lot of European money. There's not a lack of funds here. Then also knowledge here in Europe to set up. We are setting up the new open AI of Europe. And then we buy a bunch of graphic cards from NVIDIA.
Yeah.
So we don't need to rely on US, and still it's not happening. So, that's my question.
So to be clear, like,
and is it there that maybe the EU legislation is like hurting us because the companies cannot maybe use the data, but there is no data, or they have to respect too many regulations we have here, while in the US, it's I'm simplifying, but it's the Wild West, and they can do whatever. And
this is a super interesting direction that we are going in with this conversation. I really love it. So thanks very much for this. But like on this front, like another example of breaking the rules and therefore like innovating, Grok. has been trained on one of the largest compute cluster, which is this. When I talk about they need a lot of compute, this is a compute cluster which is the largest one in the world. I think it's called Colosseus or something like that, with Elon Musk approach to productivity in a record-breaking 2 months, right? Like they managed to put together the biggest compute cluster in 2 months. The EU timelines for building gigafactories are about 3.5 years or something like that. And even that, it might be a bit longer even. So the thing is that like it worked, they managed to put it in 2 months, but like one of the key things that they did to kind of like bypass the rule and eventually break the rule is to use like mobile generators to power up the thing. Because usually when you put so much compute in it, the electricity grid would not handle it properly. So what they have done is like, as a way to make it just 2 months, they just like ordered, I think like a 45, I forgot, there isn't the exact number somewhere online, but like power generators that would power the whole thing. The thing though is that like it is illegal to use such a generator for more than a year, I think. And without recording it in a specific, you need to have it assessed because you're basically like building your own small power plant. So they basically have, they have been breaking that rule of like in terms of energy power supply compliance in the US. This does not happen in the EU, but like I understand like the tension, like the French policymakers, I think some other European policymakers are also mentioning like, zoning law need to be updated so that it's easier for us to build and connect data centers and that kind of thing. And yeah, I understand the drive for this. It's maybe a choice that society has to make. I'm not like in principle opposed to that kind of thing, but like we have to make sure that like there was a reason why this regulation existed. Do we want to make an exception, or do we want to remove that regulation entirely? It's a fine societal debate to be had, right? But it's just about like the breaking the rules and the notion of like more fundamentally, like rule of law shouldn't be like an excuse for everything, right? But like it's the bedrock of how our society works. So whenever we start being tempted to go away from the rule of law, we should maybe consider like modifying the laws themselves, but like let's not give a pass to the players that are trying to break the rule of law.
So what's the ethical way out for the EU here? Because then we cannot ask EU companies to break the law. We cannot ask them to break up with allies either, which is what China and Elon Musk did in their own way, each of them. We could ask our legislators to change the rules. So if we don't want fewer of them, but perhaps we want rules that are better adapted to the AI age. Yeah, so what is it that the EU can do?
Smarter rules is,
if anything.
This is the panacea to everything, right? Like it's like we need to basically one of the things that TFS does. We find the policy recommendations that are like providing the safeguards that are needed to align these models with like the society's preferences, but to do that in a way that breaks this trade-off between like, it's like additional red tape or something like that. We always want to minimize the amount of compliance burden that gets created on something. And like we have actually worked quite a bit on some proposals that are actually like in order for facilitating also enforcement that are actually just about like kind of regulatory efficiency in a way. But the concrete solutions there like are structural. Right? It is not in order to have like that money because we didn't get to that. But like you mentioned, like there is money in the EU. Sorry to say, but like this money is a lot into the insurance, the big insurers and all of this. And the way it is regulated right now, European insurer cannot invest that money as freely as it can be invested in the US, right? But even if it could, one of the things is that we do not have this like venture capital structure, this venture capital sub-industry that exists, which would be about like taking rich people's money and putting it into fairly like high volatility and
risky
ventures, right? Like this is the kind of thing that, like we don't have much of that. Like when you talk with venture capital partners here, like if you go, one of the things that's interesting in terms of the cultural shock of, I've talked with like American investors in Europe and with European investors in the Bay Area, right? And so like one of the anecdotal thing that comes up is often like, okay, US investors will always kind of, if you ask them $3 million, they will ask you like, okay, what can you do with 5 million? While in the EU or in some member states in the EU, it's more like if you ask them $3 million, they will ask you what you can do with 1 million, right? So there is less appetite for it. But like the reason why there is less appetite is like there is maybe a bit of like as Europeans, we have been slapped in the face really badly from an historical perspective, right? Like in terms of like our capital stock has been destroyed twice over the past over 120 years, right? And this is the kind of thing that like doesn't help us while feeling confident about putting money in this place or that. There are also like incumbents that make sure that like in a way they can be the only one almost taking the risks in the EU or something like that. Some European investors are very frustrated about is to see like all the lobbying by American investors for EU related rules and all of this. So I think like in terms of the smart rules and all this, like it's always important to have like, it benefits everyone to have a very strong, two things, a very strong, whenever you have an authority to enforce it, like you want them to be technically competent, you want them to be available, you don't want them to be overwhelmed, right? So like having a strong, like currently this is the European AI office that is being built, like these are like the organizations, an organization that needs to be staffed properly. And originally it was envisioned to have 200 full-time equivalent, and I think like they have hired, I don't want to give too many numbers, but like they might have hired like 40 at this stage, right? Like they're not even like close to that yet.
And this will be the department that will be in charge of enforcing the AI Act at European level.
Structurally is the equivalent of a directorate within DG Connect.
In the European Commission.
And it's in charge of enforcing the general purpose AI part of the AI Act. Notably, it has a bunch of other functions. And so that's something that will be, like it will be important for them to know what they are doing, because the general purpose AI part of the AI Act is the one that like, will make or break in a way the confidence in like, investing into general purpose AI, EU homegrown general purpose AI, right? Like if like investors feel that like Microsoft and Google will anyway capture that market, it won't be fair and that kind of thing. Like this is an issue. If the incumbents is already winning, like this will like chill.
But that sounds like we need first to weaken them in order to have a shot at it.
It's maybe not weakening it. It's more like setting up the terms of like, well, actually, like here is avoiding this toxic relationship basically, where like we find ourselves where our laws, like on digital laws, like the lobbying is like 95% of the lobbying is from like in terms of spending, or maybe even more, is from non-European companies. So we are literally like, the EU digital realm and the data notably is literally like on the menu, and we are not really, the EU is not at the table to negotiate this aspect. I think a regulator that can, basically is competent technically, but also like, operationally and technically, operationally and politically as well, to make sure that like they do not just end up captured by industry. So we have seen that in many countries where like, there is a heavy reliance, like, I don't know, the aviation authorities in the US being staffed by Boeing staff member, like that kind of thing. Like this is never great.
Boeing
exactly
fall out of the sky.
Exactly. Yeah. This kind of stuff is not great. You want to avoid that. So for that, you need to ensure that they have enough staff, that the staff is competent enough, and that they can basically like talk on equal or ideally even like have more knowledge than the average regulated entity. Second thing, ensure that your rules can be updated in light of new evidence. This is the kind of thing that like there will always be, as part of the future proofing, there is always an updating mechanism. But now the rules are so industry friendly when it comes to the code of practice on general purpose AI, right, in particular, but also in the AI Act. The rules are so business friendly that like they don't want it to be updated ever. So there is a bit of or if there is an updating, they want this to be like, I don't know, every 2 years, and like with a massive like legislative process around it, like the same way that you would update a full-fledged legislation, right? No, you need to be actually more responsive to that. In 2 years, the technology will look extremely different. Think about 2 years ago, the technology was like, not nearly as we are not nearly, we are talking about OpenAI being worth 300 billion.
In 2 years, we could all be just living in an AI simulation. So maybe we won't have the chance to update the rules.
I mean, we have to consider the exponential here, right? Like people are now openly on a regular basis and more like, integrating this chatbot to their own life as a friend, as a colleague, and that kind of thing. This is an exponential. Like, I think a year ago, most people would have said like, no. It's a bit like with Facebook. Originally in Facebook, people were like, people will never share private information on Facebook and all of this. And then like 6 months later, you started having like, well, actually they do. And then like, 6 months after that, it's like they have like actually half of the population is there sharing private information on this platform. So we need to have like an updating mechanism that is like a lot more on the, like responsive to like if a new method exists to ensure that like we train a model. So without having like, because these models occasionally like provide tools and techniques for how to build chemical and biological weapons. If you find a technique to prevent that from happening, you should update your rules to make sure that like everybody else starts doing the same. You should not have like to wait maybe 5 years until like we might consider, because otherwise the provider and the developers that have innovated to develop that new technique for preventing so-called CBRN risk is not being rewarded for making actually innovation towards trustworthiness. And that's a problem.
So, number one, we need a strong regulator, a strong enforcer. Number two, we need legislation that can be swiftly updated. Is there a number three, a magical number three to the recipe?
Well, because you brought up before the interaction with, for example, the DSA, GDPR, and all this, I do think like it's important at some point for the EU to realize that like this patchwork approach to the digital regulation is probably, it's going to be, at some point, like it's really important that at least for the enforcement, it works together, right? That like, the Digital Service Act enables yearly audits of some of these providers for very specific Digital Service Act reason. If the AI Act like requires an audit or some request for information, maybe there is a way to kind of like combine this as a joint request for information. I don't know, this kind of stuff like could be so see it's looking at synergies. But yeah, this is like a more of a technocratic jargon of like at some point we're gonna have the Digital Market Act, the Digital Service Act, the AI Act should be working together as a very efficient regime. It shouldn't feel like you are, no, sorry, you have to contact my colleague in this unit in order to address that problem. Right?
You seem to know well how the European Commission works.
Yeah, right. There is a bit of that.
I guess it's going from a puzzle to the full picture, right? So
yeah, I think so. Yeah. But it's hard. This third point, I expect this to be, we converge towards that like within the next 10 years. But definitely the first point about like staffing, this is now like the rules on general purpose AI will kick in on August 2nd, 2025, right? So this is the first things that are applying in the AI. So you need the proper staffing for that. And then like the second one of like the updating mechanism, like you need to somehow provide the legal clarity ahead of time of like, by the way, in September, like we'll start looking at this specific chapter, see whether we're going to update it and whether we're going to use new techniques that have been developed, because like now the rules have been agreed upon like over a year ago, right? So there is a bit of lag already, and a lot of things needs to be updated. For example, agentic AI, right, is this new thing. Everybody expects this to be messy because everybody knows that like hallucination has not been fixed, and therefore everybody expects the equivalent of hallucination, but with actual actions taken on the internet or actions taken in the real world with like some of the Internet of Things stuff, which could be getting a bit painful to watch. And we see already like some of these robots. I don't know if you've seen like whatever. This is, we don't have to dive into that, but like it's scary to see like a robots controlled by a large language models that can hallucinate, because the large language model can start instructing stuff to the robots that is not matching with reality, and that leads to crashes.
It's hallucination in 3D.
Yeah.
Okay, Nick, to wrap up, we need to ask you the final question, and this is a must ask, I think, given everything that we've been talking about, but who funds the future society? So who are your stakeholders?
So we are funded by philanthropy, right? So this is like, there are some foundations that have been established. So there are some German foundations, some American foundations, in particular British as well, of people who are concerned about the impact that AI will have on our society. They like the work we do. So notably like with regards to this approach that we have of like really like aligning this technology to society's preferences, and all of that has been quite, but like this is philanthropic funding. It's on the transparency register of the EU, right? Like we disclose that over there, but it is the kind of a purely philanthropic. We have had some individual donors, grassroots donors, who work at big tech companies and who feel like, there are some risks there, and my lab is not doing enough. So I'm kind of like funneling some of my salary to this, and very little on this.
So good action of the day.
Yeah, good action of the day. So I encourage anyone who is listening to this to consider donating to the Future Society. Grassroots donations are extremely useful. Go to thefuturesociety.org. But more seriously though,
end of the commercial.
But more seriously though, like this AI thing is part of a broader discussion about like tech and society. We have seen with social networks, right, the impact in the US that it has had relative to the EU is like, it's not perfect in the EU, far from it, but like it's actually like been like maybe we have stopped the bleeding beforehand thanks to the DSA. Like we may have been able to get like some stuff in order with the COVID response and all of this. Like this was like thanks to the code of practice that existed against disinformation. That has probably helped us a bit, but even that like is not yet fully resilient to like what's the elections in Romania, right, where there was like some election manipulation and all of this, which are meant to be prevented by this legislation, by these regulations. So I do think on the broader debate about tech and society, a lot of people care about that, and this is why a lot of people donate to it in a philanthropic way. So we are a non-profit, right, registered in the US, and so this is like the bulk of our income, like 97% of our income is from pure like donations and grants by foundations, and then like we do sometimes like for events we do some sponsorships.
Okay, well, Nick, thank you for working on behalf of our Future Society today, and thank you for coming to EU Untangled. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So that was our conversation with Nicolas Moës, Executive Director of the Future Society. We hope you found this episode on AI regulation as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps others to discover the show. You can follow EU Untangled on LinkedIn, Instagram, Blue Sky to stay updated on future episodes and behind-the-scenes content. And finally, we really like to hear from you, whether it's feedback, thoughts on this episode, or ideas for future topics. Just send us an email at mail@untangled-podcast.eu. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
So one question that I have is, what is your own relationship with AI? So how do you use AI in your life, private and professional? Knowing everything you know about AI, it's either a love or hate relationship, I bet. What is it?
So since I've checked and double checked whether OpenAI was actually, when you say that you don't want them to reuse your data, whether they were actually doing that, because currently like nobody's really enforcing this, but like I have now more confidence that they actually are not reusing my data. So I have started using ChatGPT since I know that like my private data cannot be used for retraining. But more importantly, to me, like given the type of thing I'm writing into this thing, is like I don't want anyone to at some point, like the same way Facebook a while ago started like pulling data from Facebook about George Soros, right? Like because they wanted to build a case against him, and so I wouldn't want this kind of stuff to happen to the work that I do.
And what do you use ChatGPT for? Like what kind of tasks?
So recently it's been about like with generating list of like, hey, can you find me 5 recent cases about like privacy or something like that, or give me like list of like individuals who have been like notorious for speaking out about X, Y, or Z, and then like asking them for the source. Following up by asking them for the source has generally been like correcting several of the mistakes that were made during the first generation. So that's pretty useful. So so kind of like brainstorming type of thing, not analysis or anything like that. And then occasionally translation. I have actually been doing quite a bit of that.
Have you asked it to generate your Ghibli avatar?
I have not. No, I don't use the image generation that much.
Yeah.
I still find it pretty outrageous what is going on with the whole creative. It's a personal view, right? Like not a professional one here, but like it's the copyrighted, what is being done to creatives and copyright holders. So by the way, we have to realize like copyright holders are also full-fledged companies and all of this, right? So it's not just like the artists. It's not exclusively the artists, but like still, the EU promised like that there could be an opt-out mechanism. And there was no opt-out mechanism. That's as simple as that. And I think like in 2026, the EU will be updating the copyright directive. And given what the tech companies have lobbied for in the US, which is literally like, I think there was a tweet from Musk about like delete all copyright law or something like that. I think we should brace ourselves for like the EU actually like shifting its stance on the opt-out. So like image generation has not been. I've used like maybe like 4 times over the past 2 years, and I don't feel good about this. Like this is definitely something where there is a solidarity in a way to have. The text generation is also based on copyrighted data, right? And like this is equally outrageous. But the way I use it is like it's purely as a search engine type of approach. And
do you still Google things?
I do Google most of things still. I'm a bit of a...
How do you decide when to Google and when to use AI? I mean, I think also the line is becoming very thin between those two actions. But like,
for example, when I'm looking for 5 cases, I know the whole internet is great, but I know that like it's very likely that even like of the first 20 results from Google, like that these 5 cases will be listed because there is not enough coverage about these cases or something like that, and therefore like I know that this compilation work would take me a solid like 25 minutes of digging and Googling while it can be generated. Like, and then what I do is that I reuse and I check like, okay, there are the 5, and then I can already enter a name or something like that. Yeah, there are plenty of things that are not on the internet, and it might sometimes be faster for me to find the information and the nuance I need by reaching out to the right person.
While recording a podcast, it is always possible to occasionally make statements that are maybe a bit less precise than intended. Nicolas asked us to specify a few points he made. At around minute 43, he mentioned Elon Musk's compute cluster and said it took around 2 months to build it. Actually, it was 122 days for the first 100,000 chips and then another 92 days for additional 100,000 chips. His point is still the same, even though construction time was more around 4 to 7 months, not 2. Towards the end of the episode, he mentioned that he checked and trusts OpenAI, that they are not reusing his data for training. A few weeks after this recording, new judicial developments in the US now force OpenAI to retain all user content indefinitely going forward. It is unclear whether his point still stands, as there is now no clarity about whether OpenAI actually reprocesses everyone's data, even when opting out from this. And finally, when talking about copyright laws, he says, I think there was a tweet from Musk about this. Well, the tweet actually was from Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, and Elon Musk just replied to that tweet with, I agree.